You're listening to the Rack and Round Table podcast, episode number 74. I'm your host, David Oria, and I'm here with my co-host,
Chris Sagana, and today we continue the conversation on change and decision making. We were inspired by our previous guest, Kuya Mikey, aka Michael Domini, and
Michael
we
Domney.
just actually David and I go through some examples of our life where we had to either make a very quick decision that could change our lives, or a decision that we had some time to make that also impact our lives, and how we kind of deal with the whole situation. What do you think, David?
Yeah, man, we talked a lot about just like how our mindsets around change have grown from like
Mm.
back in the day and up until now, right? And how that, in what ways it's changed, right? And in what ways it's helped us also evaluate the decisions that we're about to make. So it's a really good one. So, man, actually, these past couple episodes have been really, really thought provoking, at least for me. Like talking about um change, talking about um and you and I were talking just like a minute ago about what's like our approach to that. And I think like change happens in very, very different ways, like different points in our life. You were kind of comparing and contrasting like things that need to be decided on pretty quickly and things that maybe take a little bit of time. Like kind of what was your thought process behind like that topic itself?
Yeah, I wanted us to record an episode on change, and I'll be very transparent here. David and I had a different episode on change when he was visiting. I gotta let them know because some of our friends are there, and they're
Dude,
probably
that
wondering
was
why we haven't posted.
so good,
I know.
bro.
So we
Yeah.
recorded an episode when David visited, and we recorded it in our living room, and I messed up by not checking audios to make sure that
Yeah.
David's mic was picking up, and then when I was editing the video, I was like, "There's no sound." There's so
It
this is
happens,
us.
man. It happens.
Yeah, man. We just gotta learn from our mistakes. See, we learn
Right.
from our mistakes and
Right.
move on. But yeah, so I was thinking about having an episode on change, but I was thinking, man, change is such a broad topic because there's so many different aspects of change where it's like when you know a change is going to come, how you prepare. Sometimes you have this life event that you're forced to make a change. Sometimes there's an
Yeah.
opportunity that comes or options that appear where you can make a decision on which change you want to make in your life. And then I started thinking about just narrowing it down to just our thought process and emotions that we felt when it came to changes that we had the choice to make, where there's a decision that was to be made in a short amount of time, and how we made that decision. And also when an example of when we had a decision to make and a change in our life where we had more time to think about it, and
Mm.
how we were going to make that decision. And I know that David has a lot of different examples in his life, so he's gonna have to pick just two things.
My life is a constant like flux of just random things just changing. Oh
That's a good
man.
thing. It's a good
Yeah.
thing. It's good changes. You want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I guess kind of like my thought process around that. Or actually let's start with like just like the emotions, right? I think before, and again, these things change, these things evolve, and maybe your approach evolves, or maybe your even just like the way that you respond to changes evolves. And I think that's how it has been for me, especially for someone that's I feel like my life is constantly like moving and just ebbing and flowing, that it's almost it's just like part of it now. It's just part of it. And so before, I think my approach was, or the emotions behind that was a lot of like fear, a lot of I was nervous, and I still feel that, but not to the point where it's like debilitating. Because I think before, when especially like when I was younger and things were changing, like for example, I moved like across the country to go to school, and so that was a huge change. And what's crazy is that, dude, I didn't even I went to school in LA and I moved from Chicago, and I never even stepped foot on the campus until the first day of orientation.
Whoa,
Yeah.
wait. So
Yeah.
you guys never visited before? Like
Never
this?
even
Oh
visited
wow.
before. What's crazy, I visited the like all these schools on the East Coast, and then it ended up going to school on the West Coast. Yeah, got accepted. I was like, all right, cool, yeah, let's do it. And then stepped onto campus for the first time during orientation. And it was like so that kind of stuff, the build up to that was a lot of nerves, a lot of just like unknown, right? And a lot of fear, maybe because of the unknown. Um, but now I think just the way that I kind of what I feel is I still feel that like, kind of like nervous about the unknown. Yeah, just sometimes there's fear, depends on what it is, but um now it's like I kind of like welcome it almost. It's like, oh,
Mm,
this is gonna be like this is gonna be cool, right? And I think a lot of it is perspective. The change is good. I used to always think like, man, change is not bad, but change is hard. I used to think
mm,
change is hard. That's why people associate that with bad. And I
mhm.
was like that. But now it's like, no, change is not hard. Change is easy. It just depends on how you look at it. Depends on how you approach it. And so instead of it being like that fearful, debilitating way of feeling for me, now it's like it's cool. It's like, all right, like what's this like what am I going to find here, like what am I going to discover, who am I going to discover, right, like about me, and who do I get to, what do I get to explore and stuff. And so again, it's kind of grown in that way. So I think even with like when talking about short decisions, short bursts of change versus like change over like a long period of time, I still think about it the same way. I approach it the same way. And I think maybe that's just because of like the way that I've been kind of exposed to change, for a while now. But like, what about for you? Are your approaches kind of different? Are your approaches the same? And do you feel the same also, like when you kind of experience that?
Yeah, I think with age, you face more change in life, and you
Oh
face
yeah.
more decisions you have to make. And I think you exactly what you said as far as you recognize the fear, but I think we kind of transform the energy into like understanding it's just the challenges that are making us fearful. The
Yeah.
challenges that are going to be down the road. And I think the more that you are in situations for change, the more that you kind of put yourself in situations to make decisions like that
Yeah.
too, is when you get used to it. It's like getting reps in, right? It's like,
Yeah.
like I didn't die this last change, or like my
Yeah.
whole life wasn't shattered from this one change. So like I think I can handle this next one,
Yeah.
but it's still a challenge nonetheless. You know what I mean? I think it's just a matter of how you handle it. I think a question about this example when you went to UCLA. That was how much time did you have to make that decision?
So, man, back when college, I feel like that was such a long time ago. College apps, I submitted in November or something like that. End of the year, end of my senior year. And then I think acceptances happen like at the beginning of or at the beginning of like the new year. So like middle of senior year. So I think maybe like November, December was like application. Then acceptance was like January, February or something like that.
Mm,
And then I moved in, or we moved in July. So February to July, maybe. That's kind of like the preparation stages. But even at that point, man, like it was high school, right? So
hmm
I was busy with doing like other things, and I was just like, I don't even think I really knew what was like about to happen until maybe like May, June, July. Like it's like, oh wait, like, oh yeah, we're all like graduating. And then it's like, oh wait, like now we're packing up our house. Oh wait, like
hmm
the moving truck is here. We're putting all these things into this truck that's gonna take all of our stuff to California. And it's like,
But wait, your
oh
whole family moved at the same time? Sorry, your whole
um
family moved too?
so my family had they were moving to San Diego at that time,
Hmm
because I'd gotten in and we were all already like preparing, but like my dad stayed back home. That was another thing, right? Like
mm
being just with my dad being still in Chicago and like the rest of our family being in California, and so we were like packing up our house and like putting things into the truck, into the moving truck trailer. And then we had like these like goodbye parties and stuff. It was like then it started to just like kind of culminate. And I
mm.
was like, what is going on? So that even that in that long period of time, it wasn't like I had more time to adjust, even though I did. I think it was just like it all kind of like happened like all of a sudden, it's kind of crazy to even think about that.
It was that a part. I mean, let's say you didn't pick UCLA. Would
Mhm.
your family was it? Are they still planning to move to California, or
Dude,
was that?
I think about that all the time, man. And
Oh
and and,
wow.
and I think that if we didn't if I didn't get into school in California, or if I didn't end up choosing to go there, they probably would have stayed in Chicago.
Hmm.
Yeah, if I went to school out east, probably would have stayed in Chicago. That would have like drastically like changed the outcome of where we are today, I think.
Yeah.
But that was part of their plan, that was something that they'd always talked about. And then just like, oh my gosh, like this kind of like lines up. It's all happening, right? It makes sense that they do that. And then that was like actually at the like towards the like 2008, 2009, the housing crash, right? So then they were like,
Mm,
oh, we can, this is like the perfect time, right? So
hmm.
it all kind of like made a lot of sense at that time. So, but yeah.
So let's, I mean, like, I feel like there's a lot of decisions that not just you saying, okay, it's UCLA, So
Yeah.
can we talk a little bit, break down the decision making and knowing that
Mm.
there was going to be change and like what factors you took into play? I guess you guys, or what did you guys do? How did you guys make the decision? Well, first with
Yeah.
you, yeah.
Yeah, that was dude, I don't even know. It was so as far as like approaching this from like the perspective of like understanding that there's going to be a huge change, a huge
Hmm,
shift
hmm.
in my life. Dude, I feel like I was even just too naive to understand that,
Mm,
and not that that's a bad thing. It was like I didn't even really understand that to the point where I could like um where I could feel like really, really nervous like that whole time. I started feeling nervous when I like finally felt it happening, right? That was when I was like, oh man, like um this is actually happening, then you get that all those butterflies in your stomach. But before then when I was like making that decision, I felt like it's just like, oh, like I'm just choosing like the best school for me, you know?
mm,
It's like,
mm,
okay, yeah, like this is like part of the process. It was like that naivety almost was like it was like a good thing.
mm, mm,
But that's kind of where I mean like it's evolved, right? Because like now these decisions that we make as like older adults, it's like they're almost like planned.
mm,
They're thought about a lot more, and there's like a bigger like decision making process that happens now for me at least, right?
mm,
Before it was just like, all right, what's the best one that I can go to, right? Where it makes the most sense, like the nicest weather or whatever it is, that you're deciding on. But now there's so many more factors that I think we have to like include when approaching like a big decision, in life. Like, did you kind of like you've moved around a lot too, right? In your life.
mm.
Um, but I mean, I don't know, like, but were you part of those decisions as well? Or like what was that kind of like growing up? And then now how do you kind of like juxtapose that with like the decisions about change that you make now as like a married man, right? About
Hmm,
that kind of
hmm.
stuff.
So with me moving around as a Navy kid, we didn't have much of a say. It was more of my,
Yeah.
my dad was given the options, and then he'd make the right decision for our family. But I would say like if I were thinking back in like 18 years old, and decision making now and adjusting to change, I think it's where you've gone through this process enough, and you know yourself a little
Yeah.
bit more, that you're starting to think steps way ahead, right? So when you were
Yeah.
thinking about school, it was like, okay, this is the best school because I think this is going to help me in the future, or but you're not thinking about like, well, how this is going to impact this and this and this. Whereas
Yeah.
now you're like,
Yeah.
well, how is this going to look if I have kids in the future? How is this going to look if
Yeah.
for my wife's career or whatever else, But I guess an example I could bring up when I was thinking of making like a quick decision was, so when I finished high school and I was going through the different community colleges trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I was originally pursuing nursing, and then I switched over to dental hygiene because I don't think I can do nursing, so I'm gonna try the dental hygiene route, and it had pretty much the same requirements, right? Prereqs. I had the anatomy, physio,
Yeah.
micro done already. I was like, I will just switch to something that fits the same criteria. And the crazy thing about this program is that it here in San Diego, it's like a waitlisted program. So even though if you're done with the
Mm.
prereqs, you apply, and you have to wait like 2 or 3 years.
Mm. Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah. So in between that time, I was like, what do I do now while I'm waiting? Oh, I'll just go get my bachelor's in whatever. If it's the same kind of thing, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? And and then eventually, I get the call to the program down in San Diego's dental hygiene program. I was like, okay, you're in. Come to the orientation. I went to the orientation, and they said, okay, well, just make sure you want to do this and fill out the paperwork. You guys have until like, I think they only gave us like a week or two to let us know for sure if we're going to come or
Wow.
not, right? Because it's a wait list. So
Yeah.
if we have already changed our mind or if there's another opportunity, they want to give it to the next person waiting in line. So within that time frame, I went home, talked to my parents about it, and they're like, "Have you even like shadowed anybody who does this? Have you even done it?" And I was just like, no, I'm good. I think I could do this.
Yeah.
So she's like, here, let me set you up with my friend who it works at a dental office. And then I went to shadow a dental hygienist there, and there was a lot of blood, man. And that's the reason why I couldn't do nursing, bro. It's because of the blood. And the dental hygienist was like, so why want to pursue this? And I was like, oh, because this and that. She's like, kind of like deterring me for the career. Not knocking on
Oh,
dental hygienists out there. She's just like, it's very saturated. It's like you first good. I was just like, man, I don't know if I'm good at that, or if I'm like, I had to like really question myself, like, why am I doing this? Why am I
right.
pursuing this? Right. And to be honest with you guys, it's because I Googled dental hygienist salary in California. And that's what kind of influenced my decision. I wasn't
Yeah.
getting any kind of pressure from my parents or anybody else for me to pursue this career. And I'm glad that my mom pushed me and saying that make sure this is something you really want, because this school would have required me, it's like a 2 or 3 year program. I would have to commute like almost 2 hours a day if I didn't want to move down there.
Wow.
And just knowing the grind and making sure that if you really want this, that the intentions are right. I'm not just doing it because it seems like they make good money, or that I didn't want to, I had to make the decision if I was going to be happy with this X amount of years from now, if I'm going to make this investment.
For sure.
So, after shadowing, really just talking to my parents about it, and a lot of like just self reflection of why I'm doing this, um, I had called them like a couple of days later and said, hey, I'm not going to come. So it's like,
Wow.
yeah, I had to make that decision, knowing that I can't wait that long, because if that is going to prohibit somebody else who can get in the program, then, who am I to hold that from
Right.
anybody else? Right. But I think that was where I started realizing I can make rash decisions like that can impact my career and the trajectory of whichever path I take without it completely sabotaging my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay.
But I have to acknowledge why also, because I had the comfort of still living with my parents. I didn't have like a family or a mortgage to pay at the time. So financially, I didn't have too much of a constraint. It was more of like what I
Yeah.
wanted to do with my life. But I guess, yeah, just it's to make before making big decisions, speaking with people that you trust,
Yeah.
because they won't just help you in making that decision and kind of force you to self reflect. I think that whatever decision you make, they'll be there to comfort you through that like anxiety, that fear, whatever worst case scenarios coming in your mind, they'll like pull you from those thoughts.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as any other changes for you, I mean, like who do you turn to when it comes to
Yeah.
like when you have a change in your life?
That's a that's a good question. I think like, well, actually to backtrack a little bit, you mentioned like you or when you were talking, I had like this like flashback to like what the decision making process for this like huge life change back in college was, and then like comparing that to like most recently, right? Like my decision to go to pursue fellowship. And
Mm-hmm.
so like just thinking about like who I was back then and who I am now and like my approaches to that, it's just like so different, like, and you mentioned a couple things like um being you're now, as we've grown and had these experiences and these reps, right? We think so much farther ahead with our decision making process, and so much far ahead as far as what is this change going to do for that vision down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And what's crazy is that like when I think about that, like in my 18-year-old self, like dude, that was nowhere on my like radar, man. That was nowhere on my radar. It was just like, all right, like what's like the coolest place I could go to? What's like the nicest spot I could go to? What's gonna like not cost like the most money? Like
Yo,
where like and that was it. Like it was like, all
yeah.
right, like,
But I gotta interrupt real quick, because I think anybody around that age range isn't thinking that far down the line, and that's
right.
okay, right?
That's
Because it's
okay.
it's natural. And because I will admit this right now, the only reason why I went to UCSD is because I wanted to know where my girlfriend was going to school, dude. I wasn't thinking about like, ah, I mean, that's how I relate to that story. You know what I
Right.
mean?
That's amazing, dude. I like it's just yeah, because you're right, man. You're no one like at that time, and I mean like well not no one, but like most people maybe like at that time like are just not thinking that far ahead and like the impact that this decision is going to make on their life, right? And maybe because I don't know, like some people are, and that's awesome. And if
Mhm.
you're not, like that's awesome too. But just like understanding that like that I think that just illustrates like the evolution of our mindsets around change. Because
Hmm.
now, like, there were so many things that I was like thinking about, right? Like, I was thinking about, like, man, like, okay, so like, where, like, what does it look like from moving process? Like, what's going to be the easiest? Like, is this going to change like our circle? Is this going to affect
Mm.
our marriage? Is this going to affect the way that we raise our kids? Is this going to change the outcome that we like want in our life? And like, again, we're thinking again, the outcome 10, 20 years down the road affects there's decisions about like this life change that we're about to make. And so
Hmm.
I think that just like it's so funny to just think about how, yeah, like even that itself changes, right?
Hmm.
The way that we approach those types of things. But how do you I guess now talking like now that like what you've learned, um like thinking of like a time when you had like a drastic change or like a big move, like but those feelings inside, right,
Hmm.
before you made that decision or even while you were making that decision, like what were they, and then how did you like get through
Hmm.
those emotions?
I guess I'll go back to when I changed my previous job, maybe like 4 years ago, to this new job, right?
Yeah.
And I've talked about this before, where I started getting these feelings where it's like I don't think this is the right place for me.
Mm.
Starting to feel a little toxic, and I think just getting cues of what didn't feel right for me. This goes with like when do I know it's time for a change, right? And this is just
Mm.
one aspect of it where I know that this part of my life that takes up 8 hours of my day almost every day is negatively impacting me, right? So I had to start self-reflecting, like, is this the right place for me? Am I going to wait till it gets better? Am I going to wait to see if I can eventually adapt to this? Or am I
Mm.
taking this home with me? Is it now impacting the people I love around me? What is it doing to my health? So I do
Mm.
a lot of self-reflection, a lot of assessment on what is this doing for me in the moment, and how is this going to look a couple like days, months, years from now.
Mm.
And then me talking to people who I'm very close to, like obviously my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, talking to my family members about this,
Yeah.
just getting their perspective on it, because in my mind was that, okay, if I leave, what does that mean for work, right? Do I look for a new job first and then leave? And if I do
Mm.
leave, I have a pretty good position here. Am I got to start all over? You know what I mean?
Mm.
Proving myself. Am I going to have to find something with equivalent pay? Am I willing to take a pay cut on this? A lot of different factors, right? But I think not just speaking with everybody and the self reflection, just writing down like what are the pros and cons of me staying.
Mm-hmm.
What are the cons? What are the good things of me staying? What are the bad things? But what are the good things and bad things if I leave?
Does that help
And
with like the emotion of things
I
for
think so,
you?
because
Yeah.
it does for me. Um, Instead of letting emotion drive it, it's more like the cognitive sense, like how the thought
Mm.
process of it, right?
Yeah.
Not letting emotions take over your decision making, but more reasoning,
Yeah.
critical thinking. Let's um what are my options, right? Because I think
Yeah.
as when you're in bad situations like that, you kind of feel cornered. But when you start realizing there's options out there for you, you start like feeling a little more hopeful. Like
Yeah.
I can either, if this situation isn't working out, I can find a better opportunity for me. And then
Right.
you start getting that motivation. Okay, I'm gonna start looking. I'm gonna start looking what else is out there. What else is
Yeah.
better. And then you start
Mm.
applying, and then you start trying to reach out to people that who are out in the industry that you want to work in. But that's my process of it, I think.
Mm. Nice.
Of course, just again thinking more down the line, like if I leave, what does that mean for me financially? What does it mean for those around me? And
Yeah.
if I support anybody. At the time when I left, I was not married yet, still living at home too, but knew that I still had some bills to pay. I want to get married pretty soon, so what does
Yeah.
that mean to me financially? So
I
yeah,
like that.
that was
I
my
like
my thought process. I guess let me compare that to the dental hygiene decision I made.
Yeah.
I think the difference is that I had a lot more time to think about this job
Mm.
change, because I already had a job. Now it's just a matter of fact of me taking care of myself and health wise, because it was impacting me with my mental health. But with that, the other decision, just making that, I think I kind of followed the same steps, but there was so much more unknown with the dental hygiene part, because I had to decide, so what's next? you know.
Yeah, yeah.
This later decision was like, well, I have options now, so I can move on to that, you know.
Well, maybe that's like the thing though. It's not because maybe like after your dental hygienist decision, right? You had options. Maybe you just weren't thinking about them. But now,
That's a good point. Yeah.
like you now that's
Mm-hmm.
like part of your active process when evaluating changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like that's like, dude, that just illustrates that growth of the mindset too, man. Like I
That's a
love
good
that.
point.
I love that. That's huge. That is really, really that's big because not I mean, again, and I think and I the reason why I like was thinking about that was because I was just like asking like, so then what causes you to or what causes me, right, to feel that feeling of like fear of unknown, right? It's because you haven't evaluated all the options. But once
Mm,
you do and you realize, okay, yeah, I have choices, I have options, there's alternatives here, then it's like so much more comforting, right?
mm-hmm,
Then it's like
mm-hmm,
then it goes back to like what I was talking about earlier, right? It's like, oh, like this is like an exploration now. Like I can
mm,
like see what am I gonna discover? It's like
mm-hmm,
it
mm-hmm.
kind of yeah, like whoa. I was like in the moment analysis of that whole previous conversation.
Is that like what you're saying, that the difference between how you made a decision like around college time to now making the decision of this fellowship, I guess, where like you just go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like, um, just evaluating. I mean, I had options, right? Like during that time with college, I had I could have gone there. I was like mainly picking between three of my top schools. I just didn't know which one of the three that I wanted to go to. So there's a sense of options there. Um, but like again, it was more so like fearful because like I wasn't thinking that far ahead, and I
Mm-hmm,
wasn't like, okay, what are the options even after I get in, right? What are the things that are going to happen like a couple years down the road, 4 years after graduation? Like what does that even look like? I don't even think I
mm-hmm,
was even thinking about that kind of stuff. I had like a broad like understanding of like, oh yeah, like maybe I want to like go to med school or something like that, or maybe I want to, I don't know, start working or whatever, but it was never like clear cut like what the outcome was going to be. And so maybe that like um the ambiguity of that made it more unknown, you know what I mean?
mm-hmm,
And so
mm-hmm,
that I think contributes to that like emotion of like fear and
mm-hmm.
the nerves.
Yeah, I mean, if you can kind of, I mean, you made this recent decision that's going to make a big change in you and Kimmy's life as far as uh, accepting the fellowship, and
Yeah.
now you're gonna have to move somewhere that's still pretty close by, but still another move. I mean,
Yeah.
like just to add perspective, you have a house where you are now. You
Mhm.
know what I mean, and it kind of seems like you made a great group of friends there too. But now there's going to be another move. So how did you make the decision to pursue the fellowship?
Yeah, what's interesting is that I and like I'm just going back to like the conversations that like Kimmy and I have had. Um and what the interesting part is that the choice to like go to this particular fellowship is because it limited the amount of change that's going to happen.
Can you
Right.
explain that
Yeah,
further?
yeah, yeah. Let me like kind of deep dive into that. Right. So the fellowship itself is going to change, right? Like my job is going to change, my role is going to change, like the patients that I see, they're all going to change. But there's a difference between choosing a fellowship that will take me to, for example, Seattle or Texas or New York or
Mm-hmm,
Florida versus staying more like local to the DMV, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Staying here kind of around like the DC, Baltimore, Virginia, Maryland area, right? So it was almost as if like, yeah, like I already expected this like change was going to happen, but then how do I limit that amount of change? So I limit it by
mm-hmm.
like not moving halfway across the country, by not because that allows me to like continue to keep this like the circle of friends that we've made here, like the family that we've made here, the responsibilities that we've had here, right? We get to keep a lot of those things. And so those things actually don't change. So it was
Mm-hmm,
like
mm-hmm.
making this like decision about change, but also limiting the amount of change that happens with this decision. So it's like it's very, very interesting dynamic. And again, it's like that's also thinking like farther ahead, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thinking like what does that look like in the next year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And so again, it's such an interesting like evaluation process that it's just like grown to be that. Um, Yeah, does that make sense? I hope that makes
No,
sense.
it does. It does.
Okay, okay.
And I guess my follow up question to that is like, if you didn't pursue the fellowship, because you can kind of like stop now, right, and
Yes,
like
yeah.
just kind of practice how you are now. But how'd you? I guess what would that like what's multiverse David look like if you just like how did you not choose that version of Doctor Strange
Yeah.
or whatever, you know?
That's a good question. It's so this is gonna add like a whole nother like layer, I think, of like my evaluation process with regards to like big decisions or big changes like this. Um I've thought more of and I'm just trying to think about like what's the best way to like articulate this. Um you mentioned before like who do you talk to about these types of changes, right? And who, like what kind of perspectives do you get? And I think before and then still now, I talk to people that like have made similar changes in their life, right? Similar decisions. Like
Mm-hmm.
what did they decide and what did like what was the outcome and like why did they decide this specific thing and because they've made a similar decision, they've gone through a similar change as myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I used to do that a lot. I think that was part of again part of that process. And that still kind of is part of this process. But the next layer there for me is instead and not just asking people that have gone through a similar decision, but talking to people and getting the perspective of people that have like the similar vision of the outcome that I want.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the change is, or that's where that shift is. Yes, I've talked to people for perspective on someone that's maybe made the same fellowship decision,
Mm-hmm.
right? But now it's also adding in another layer of like talking to people that have actually had an outcome that I want in their life and that I want that for my life too. So
That's
that's
a good
kind of
point.
yeah, so that's kind of the different that's like kind of the next layer for me at least. That's what it's been.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't mention that either. But like I only talked about talking to my wife or my
Yeah.
parents or friends, but to talk find somebody who has either made that same decision that you're about to make, or someone who's even other that additional perspective of somebody who has that final outcome in life that you want,
Right.
and how they got there, and how this decision is going to impact that final outcome too.
Right,
Dang, that's
right.
crazy.
Yeah,
That's crazy,
man.
man.
Yeah, it's I think it changes things because like perspective is everything,
Mm-hmm.
and especially with and that also contributes to like the fear, right? The why we get or at least for me, why I was so scared because I didn't know. But then when someone could say like, okay, like I've made a decision like this before and this is what happened, okay, then you kind of know a little bit more. You have more
Mm-hmm.
information. But then adding to that, it's like, oh well, I mean, I haven't made that decision per se, but if you want to be in the position that I'm at, maybe this decision will help you get there, or maybe this decision won't help you get there. And
Mm-hmm.
understanding that perspective also, I think both of those two things are really really valuable when evaluating that.
Yeah, man.
Yeah,
Absolutely, dude.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
obviously this is an awesome talk, but
Dude,
I just
seriously, bro.
just round this out before we get like too long because I feel like we're gonna jump onto like another topic on change. So before we before we end, what's like any last words from this topic, like for anybody who's kind of going through this decision making process too, and who's about to embark with a change in their life that might shift whichever road they're gonna take.
Yeah, I think one thing that I would advise my like younger self would be um man, it's such a hard question. Like
Yeah, it is.
it would be it would say to be like to trust myself first thing.
Mm-hmm.
Trust myself, but that, like um man, I don't even know. That's such a cop out answer. You go
No, I think
first.
that's a good answer because I was gonna say like something very similar where it's like trust your gut, man. Like trust your
Yeah.
instinct. I think that's what it
Yeah.
is. Like trust yourself, trust your gut, trust your instinct. What I asked you a question because you're a doctor. I said, don't we have
Yeah.
like neurons from the gut that go to the brain? Like, isn't that like a science thing?
That's a science thing.
That's like physio. Is that physio? Anyway, but
Oh man. Yeah.
really, just
Yeah.
trust your instinct because it
Yeah.
sounds like. I mean, obviously, you have to do an assessment. You have to gather as much information like as you can. But in the end, when you make a decision, you are listening to like an instinct, and so I don't want to sound techy, but you're listening to your heart, not just your mind too. Your mind collects information, but at the end of the day, something in you is telling you to make this decision. And if it happens to be the wrong decision at the time or afterwards, after, like it's time to make another decision, just keep moving.
Bro,
I mean?
you filled in the gap for me. That was it right there. That was it.
Mm.
So I was you helped me get there. You helped me. You literally just helped me get there. Right. So yes, trust yourself to make the decision. Right. And the part that I didn't have, the missing piece that you literally just gave me was that that decision is going to create an experience. Right. And
Yes.
you have to learn from that experience. That's what I was like. Yeah, you just bridged that gap for me. And the thing is, like, who said that? Um, John T. Maxwell, right?
Mm.
He said, like, experience is not the best teacher. Evaluated experience is the best teacher. And so, like, when you make that decision, right, that you were just talking about, that's going to give you an experience. But then you evaluate that experience and you evaluate that decision, you evaluate that change, and then you learn from that. Like,
Damn.
that's it right there, bro.
It's not just having the experience, it's making sure you learn from it.
Yeah. Oh, dude. Yes.
sure.
Exactly. Damn, this is such a good talk, bro.
I know. We'll continue the series as
Oh, dude.
change and
Yeah.
decision making and just evaluation. I think we had our Kuya Mikey, excuse me, Michael Domini on the episode.
Michael.
Who shared his experience. I mean, I think that's an example of someone going through the process. So
Yeah.
hopefully we'll have more guests for you all to hear of people who made different changes in their life.
Oh man, dude, I love talking to you, man.
Same, man.